Welcome to the WPAOG podcast. In this episode, we welcome Colonel Anne McClain, NASA astronaut, U.S. Army Aviator, and West Point graduate of 2002. Selected by NASA in 2013, she is a Master Army Aviator with more than 2,000 flight hours across 20 aircraft and has served multiple missions aboard the International Space Station, including spacewalks conducted 250 miles above Earth. A Marshall Scholar and combat-tested leader, Colonel McClain most recently commanded NASA's SpaceX Crew 10 mission, continuing a career defined by service, precision, and leadership at the highest level. Please enjoy this episode with our host, Jamie Enos.
Colonel Anne McClain, thank you so much for joining us today on the AOG podcast. It's fabulous to have you back here on Earth, I guess we say. I don't even know. And the journey that you had on that mission is just incredible. And of course, really special to us here at WPAOG, just because of that little special locket that you had brought up there. But let's get started. And thank you for being here and jump right into it.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
So when you look back at your time at West Point, what experience do you think just kind of shaped you as that leader, that you have now become and, paving the way through everything and anything you almost do?
I think what I learned at West Point was the foundation of competency being the highest form of leadership. It's not just about charisma. It's really earned through preparation. And there's no hiding when you're a leader. Your preparation, your character will always be revealed. And that has been consistent all the way throughout my career. Flying helicopters or test flying, space flight, people don't care only how inspiring that you sound. They care whether you're calm, prepared, and decisive when things start to go sideways. And West Point taught me the discipline to be prepared for the highest missions under the highest pressure.
Yeah. And I mean, as a cadet, you were pushing yourself constantly. I mean, we can't access your GPA and all that kind of stuff, but we can log Marshall Scholarship, all of that. Just fascinating, of course, and inspirational. But your career has spanned, like you just kind of mentioned, the combat aviation, advanced education, space flight, spacewalks, right? Like youngest astronaut, right? At some point in your class, like constantly, like just pushing and pushing and pushing. How do you embrace uncertainty that comes with that, though, right? Because there's a lot of unpredictability and just keeping motivated to go forward. What do you do for that?
Yeah, I think when you go into really unknown scenarios that kind of expand the pressure on your skill set, be that Army leadership, or in my case, flying to space, you can't just rely on your competency. A lot of people try to find confidence in their competencies. And what I try to do also is be very aware of my limitations. I have confidence in the things that I don't know, so that I know the limitations of my skills. And for instance, when I used to sign off pilots as pilot in command, one of the phrases that a student taking a check ride would say to me that inspired confidence in me was when they would say, "I don't know the answer to that, but I will go find it out." Because I know that individual is going to take calculated risks and be respectful of the danger of the mission and what flying a helicopter can really result in if you're overconfident. So I think there is a lot of unknown and a lot of uncertainty. And so within yourself, you need to be certain with your own competence. And again, and communicate that to the team, because somebody else on the team is likely going to have a strength in one of your gaps. We over communicate in the astronaut corps about our strengths and weaknesses, about what certifications and qualifications we do have and what we don't have. And really reflecting on your experiences and what that enables you to bring to a situation. I always say that wisdom does not come from experience. It comes from reflection on experience. And that really helps you understand what you're capable of and what missions you can undertake.
Yeah. And that comes with like failures and setbacks, right? They're inevitable. They're going to happen, right? So what happened when things don't go as planned for you? How do you react? And do you have a really good example? You got a dirty secret you can share, but more importantly, like, how do you react and how do you coach others through that as a leader and as a mentor to younger astronauts and that kind of sense as well, or pilots?
Yeah, I think failure to me is more of a data point. It's not an identity. And test pilots, we fail constantly by design, right? We take machines to the limits of what they're capable of. We fly in regimes at the limit of what the pilot is capable of. And then we try to understand what it means to be operating on those edges. Spaceflight is an exercise in managing small failures before they cascade. So it's limiting them. In mission control, when we come across some type of failure of equipment or personnel or something is kind of behaving in an unexpected manner, the crew and the personnel in mission control work to contain it and then reestablish fault tolerance. And so we don't spend a lot of time, we spend a lot of time reflecting later on maybe what caused that or what we missed. But immediately in the operation, it's to contain that failure and then automatically build up this fault tolerance so that you are protected from repeating that failure. And so it's not something to sit and dwell on. It's not something to kick yourself on. I remember I taught at flight school for a while. And when I could see when a student made a mistake. And this was my experience when I was a student at flight school too. I would make a mistake. I would fly a bad traffic pattern. And I remember saying something one time about, hey, this is going to be a bad day. I'm having an off day. And I could see when students would say it to me, they'd fly a bad pattern, say, I'm having an off day. And I'd say, we don't have time for you to have an off day. That was a bad traffic pattern, but the next one's going to be great. And so it's containing that failure because the operation doesn't stop for individual ego or hurt ego. And so you just have to keep plugging through.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't want to sound all negative and talking about failure, but I feel like that failure gets you to the point where you're up there looking back down at this tiny little rock in the, galaxy, for lack of better words. What can you describe that feeling? What is that like? I mean, how breathless or, inspiring is that? And do you get that like, all right, I did this, but I got some more work to do, but I did this too,
Yeah, I'll kind of frame the answer to this as sharing a story from my first spacewalk. Spacewalks are probably the pinnacle of operational complexity in which I've operated. They took all the lessons that I had ever learned in my personal and professional life, my experience in flying Army helicopters on scout weapons teams, and really put it to the test. It is the ultimate team sport. So there's 2 crew members outside of the space station. We're working on a very complex, about 6-hour maintenance and upgrade to the outside of the space station. It's physically demanding. It's mentally demanding. You have to manage your system, which is your spacesuit, which is just as complex as a helicopter, right? It has cooling and heating systems. It has water systems. It has a radio and electrical system. And so they have all these same type of failures that you'd see in a helicopter. So you're managing that. You're being aware of your buddy's suit. You're focusing on the mission. You're aware of where you are on the outside of space station. So you have all these things to think about. Your safety tethers. You want to make sure you're always tethered to space station. That's very important. And I remember this moment where I was translating along the front of space station, holding on to it. And space station, just to get a mental picture, it's the size of a football field. And it's about the height of a football stadium. Wow. So if you really picture just how massive this piece of equipment is, we're in low Earth orbits. We're 250 miles off the surface of the Earth. And so the way that you can kind of picture that is Earth looks a little bit smaller. I can see horizon to horizon, but when I look out at the moon and the stars, it looks the same as if I was still on the surface of the Earth, because relatively speaking, we're not that far off. So I'm holding on to the space station, and we are going at 17,500 miles an hour. And I have all these technical things running through my mind, always trying to stay ahead of where we are. Like in aviation, we always say, don't fly anywhere that your brain hasn't been already. And I paused for a moment, holding onto the front of space station, because when I looked down at another piece of structure, I caught the shadow of my legs on space station. And it was this really interesting juxtaposition of this massive technical piece of steel and metal and advanced technology with a shadow of my legs kicking. And I just pause and I look there and I look at the Earth. And for a moment, I just emotionally took in the scene. And I really felt so small in the environment that I was in. I felt really tied to Earth. A lot of people say, did you feel really separate from Earth? I looked down and it was like I could feel gravity holding us in orbit. We are orbiting around our planet. And I looked down and thinking, this weird sense of ownership, that's my planet. And then I turned around and I looked the other direction and into this massive void of space. I can see the moon. I can see stars. Stars don't twinkle when you look at them from space, right? Because twinkling is caused by the light coming through the atmosphere. So when we see stars, they are just dots in the sky. And I was so humbled by how much more we have to explore, but also how far we've come and how many people it takes to pull off a mission like that. I was at the pointy end of the spear for that 6 hours, and we've passed the baton on to someone else, and, there's spacewalks coming up. And that was such a humbling moment. And I think my biggest takeaway was what humans can do when we work together.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. I mean, of course, I don't know about everybody, but I feel like a lot of people like look up, nightly and even during the day and just, wonder and that opportunity that's there. And, I think it's just an amazing feat and give the respect to get there. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of brain power, a lot of physical power, physicality to just to be able to do what you all do in that realm of label and title of astronaut. And we're so fortunate as West Point grads, right? You have a legacy of grads that have come before you that are astronauts, some that are active. Going all Frank Borman's all the way back, right? The Buzz. We've got so many of them, and then Frank Rubio, Astro Drew. I don't know how like. So what's the network like? We know the Olympians all like hang out and get together and kind of, bond together and, we're over in Paris, hanging out together. Is it the astronaut network the same way?
Yeah, the astronaut network is strong, I think, in part because we have this incredible shared experience that impacts us in such a similar way amongst each other, but is also sometimes so hard to describe. And it's not unlike being a member of the Long Gray Line and being part of a group with high expectations for personal and professional conduct, for service to our nation, for selfless service. And being part of both of those legacies is great. And knowing that you always can make a phone call when you need a hand with something, and there's always going to be someone willing to help.
Yeah, we hear that a lot, and I can't imagine. And it's risky business, right? Like you're not in this like coasting through space, like having a good time. This is dangerous stuff. So I can't imagine. Do you consider yourself like a thrill seeker or?
No, I'm actually definitely not a thrill
jumping off bridges with like bungee cords. Like, what's your style? Like normally.
Yeah, a lot of people ask if we're big risk takers as astronauts. And I remember I was sitting with my crew one night. We were watching a documentary about mountain climbing, and somebody said, "Wow, that's crazy. I could never do that. Like I could never do the heights and the risk." And somebody else said, somewhere there's a group of people sitting on a mountain right now, looking up into space and saying, I could never do that. And so I think when I've learned about these professions and endeavors that seem like high risk from the outside is that the people who are most successful at them are not professional risk takers, but rather professional risk mitigators. So we take a very calculated approach to identifying and mitigating any risk up until the moment of launch, until the second of launch. I mean, when we're within 1 minute of the countdown, there are still people on the ground working to identify any risk that they may need to address before launch. And then at that very moment, when the countdown hits 0 and it's time to go, you accept the risk and you go forward. And that courage isn't something that's loud. It's discipline. It's a quiet discipline. It's speaking up when you're the quietest voice in the room. It's speaking up and doing the harder right over the easier wrong, making the hard calls, knowing that a piece of data you bring back might delay the mission. It might be inconvenient, but having the courage to do that anyway.
Yeah. I can't help but notice that you're wearing your Army softball polo right now. As you played here at West Point. For those that don't know, you got to represent them. I know that you did, even before you left, we saw that great image of you with some old teammates and that kind of thing. That was great, waving across the street, I guess. It's incredible. Did you wear your ring up there too? Did you have your ring up in space?
I did take my ring on my first mission.
Yeah. And on this mission, the last mission with SpaceX 10, you had what we call the legacy gold, which is the gold that part of our ring mount memorial program, that as we meld it together, we drill, and then we take a little sample from each of those and we pass it on to new rings going forward. And, that ring comes with responsibility, right? And it represents the sacrifice and the legacy and also the unity, as you were talking earlier about the Long Gray Line. What did when you received your ring, do you remember that moment and that feeling and that meaning? I mean, not only is it that bright light at the end of the tunnel, probably, but it comes with, like I said, the responsibility. Do you remember how that meaning felt to you and how it's even evolved over time as you look down at it?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I do remember the emotions that I felt when I got my ring. It was similar to the emotions that I felt on our day when I first put on a West Point uniform. And in my young mind, I framed that as a personal accomplishment. And when I got the ring, it was this realization that I was going to actually be a graduate of this institution that I had dreamt of going to and graduating from since I was in junior high. As over time, the meaning of that ring and the meaning of being part of the Long Gray Line has distinctly changed. I recognize that the ring is not about prestige or personal accomplishment. It's about belonging to a group that expects something more of you forever. Whether you're in civilian or military life, there's always a higher standard that you're going to be held to. And, there's always these jokes about ring knockers, but subconsciously, there is always a higher expectation placed on you as a member of the Long Gray Line. So for me, flying that legacy gold wasn't just a piece of nostalgia or a reminder of where I graduated from, but it was stewardship and a recognition of the Long Gray Line and all the other people who are out doing amazing things and holding the standard high.
Yeah. And so that gold will go into the rings for the class of 2027 and moving forward. So now officially, not only do we have astronaut ring donated into it, but now the legacy gold itself has gone up into space. What would you say to the class of 2027 as they, kind of start going through this process of, understanding who's behind in part of the Long Gray Line?
Yeah. For the class of 2027, I would say that, first of all, congratulations, because it is a huge personal accomplishment, first to be part of the class and then to be part of the graduating class. And being part of that legacy means that you are always going to have a group that gets your back. It means you always have a sense of belonging, but you do always have a higher responsibility. And part of that is maintaining the legacy of the Long Gray Line. And what does that mean? To me, it means that legacy is something that you do when nobody is watching. It is preparation that's revealed in your performance. It's character that you have when you could get away with having poor character, but you choose to make those right decisions, even when the little things in life, because how you do one thing is really how you do everything. So how you behave with your friends on a Friday night is the same character that you have when you carry into your platoons, companies, and battalions, on all the other days. And you're not going to get credit for a lot of those right things that you do, but that's part of the legacy. You are inspiring and you're a role model to people around you, regardless.
Yeah. They are so excited that, you gave them this opportunity by taking it up there. And there's just a buzz back here at West Point about it. And I know that we were kind of trying to get you here at the ring melt, and training mission, always takes priority and everything else like that. So we are unfortunate to see you here in person, but I want you to know that there's definitely a buzz, and it's like a big deal to, the cadets themselves, but also the Association of Graduates too, to know that this has gone, literally out of this world kind of thing. And it kind of, when we were talking to some other grads about it, and they were talking about like, it just has this infinite possibilities, right? It just kind of describes as grads, when you come together and you ask and you get the support. I think when Debbie Edlund reached out to you, it was like, yeah, of course, I think you were so gracious and offering that. And we know that your carriage up there is like, I don't even know if it's based on weight or whatever, but the even fact that you would take it with you, and you're not allowed a lot of stuff is just reflects how much drive and purpose and honor you give back to the Academy as well. So I just want to let you know that. I know it's a little bit of digression from the interview itself, but yeah, it's super cool and people are really excited about it. So,
well, I appreciate that. I think carrying the gold was particularly special to me because, service is always a continuum, and getting to like realizing that I was going to have the ability to inspire some current cadets. And I remember thinking like, what would I have thought at the time? Like I would have been over the moon. I remember when an astronaut came, Colonel Pat Forster at the time, came when I was a plebe at West Point and talked to us. And I was inspired by him in an incredible way. I hung on to every word that he said. Mm-hmm. I took his advice as if it was black and white regulation. And fast forward, 15 years after he spoke to us, he was my first supervisor boss in the astronaut office when I became an astronaut. And so for the cadets that are out there listening today, your career is going to be what you make of it. And you can go incredible places in the Army. And the common thread is going to be that people are going to want to help you. when I was in space and I was considering different options for careers, for my involvement, for how am I going to continue my service, I reached out to 1 to 2 to 3-star generals who had no idea who I was. And their emails back were, get on my schedule. I'm always here for you. I will talk about my command. I'll talk about your options. And that is something available to everybody here throughout your career. When you are a captain and you're making that decision that all those West Point cadets get into it, 5 to 7 years, do I get in? Do I stay out?
Right.
Reach out to somebody. Send an email to a colonel who's doing something you think you might want to do. And I promise you that person is going to say, yes, come see me, because mentoring and inspiring is probably the best part of our job.
Yeah, that's powerful. And so much humility that you demonstrate as well by giving back as well. So we're very grateful for that. So as your plebe self, right, you knew you wanted to come to the academy. You've been working on that. You were like, that's what I'm doing. That's where I'm going. And then your plebe self arrives here. If you had an armchair quarterback and you look back, what would you say to baby Anne back there?
Well, first I would say that I'm very proud of her, because as with all cadets, we all have opportunities to let our dreams go, or to stop pushing so hard, or to stop believing. And it was such a long line, or a long journey to get to be selected where I am and to continue in my career. And I realize, almost with this like trepidation, I look back and think about how many times I could have taken an off ramp and taken an easier job, an easier assignment, forget it. I'm not going to study. I'm going to take a C on that test instead of trying to get the A. And I just kept pushing. So first I would say I'm proud of her for making the decisions to recommit herself. The second thing that I'll say is that before our day, 2 days before our day, we had this picnic with the new cadets that wanted to play softball. And I think I would go back and tell myself, remember this moment when you meet them, because in 25 years, when you launch to space, they are going to be there watching you. And they are going to be some of the most important people in your life. In fact, there's going to be this thing called text messaging. And every single day, literally every single day, you are going to text with this group when you are 46 years old. So I would remind her of that. And I think I would also remind her of the high level of responsibility it is to lead soldiers. It's something that we hear about when we're cadets, and that I believed, but I now understand why people emphasize that so much. I got a card from a colonel who was a family friend as I left on deployment to Iraq, and it said, never forget that the highest responsibility that you have is to lead other people's sons and daughters into a dangerous situation. And that is the highest calling of the cadets at West Point, is leading other people, because you have the privilege and responsibility of impacting other people's lives. And that needs to be the most important thing that you think about going to work every day.
So powerful. And absolutely. I mean, yeah, I don't even have a response to it, tell you honestly, because it is, and it's important, and we get that sometimes too. It's like, oh, you're a college, right? And it's like, no, we're not, and trying to explain that to, non-West Point people or families that have, new cadets coming in, and it's not. That's why it's a long day. That's why it starts early. That's why there's physical components on the commandant side of military training, and the dean side has high expectations on the academic side, and it all comes together, and every cadet an athlete, and so many elements that have to come together in order to make leadership opportunities, not only, but then to develop, future leaders of character. That's the mission. That's what we're doing, right? To serve as Army officers. So
yeah, being a leader of character is, I think I underestimated the difference between being a leader and being a leader of character, and how often that would be tested, and how often you would need to reprove that. And so, you had asked when I would go back and tell my younger self, and I would tell myself that self-awareness and humility are essential leadership skills. When you're flying helicopters, the weather doesn't care about your rank. In testing, the physics doesn't care about, your confidence or your background. And in space, the environment is utterly unforgiving. And the moment that you think you've arrived is the moment that you become a liability on a team. And so even as you're graduating from West Point, recognize that diploma is not a recognition that you've arrived and that there's no more learning to do. it is a license to begin the profession of arms.
Brilliant. Well said, Anne. Thank you so much for being on today. Really appreciate the conversation. I know that you're back at West Point, so we look forward to running into you, whether it's at a softball game or even just over, around coast, hanging out and doing all the inspirational talks that you do. You did it while you're up in space. You do it when you're here down, boots on the floor and ground. And, we love having our astronauts around. They're great supporters of the Academy and the mission and the selfless service that you described, that you're still active duty and still kind of pushing through. So appreciate everything that you're doing. And thank you again. The Legacy Gold is just, come on. No other college is going to have that.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. And thank you for this opportunity to say a few words to the long gray line.
Yeah, anytime. Oh, you got to say something to like your softball team, and we got to.
Yes, we always say beat Navy, but in softball we have to reframe that because Navy doesn't have a softball team. So in softball we say go Army, beat Lehigh.
Thank you for listening to the WPAOG Broadcast Network. Please take a moment to rate and review the show and subscribe to automatically get updates on a new episode. Thank you for listening.